What's up, gang? Welcome to The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mershazadeh. I'm so pumped to have you here with me. Now listen, The Greatness Machine, we're about two things. Number one, people who are living their passions. And number two, those who are creating greatness in the world and doing both of these things despite the odds against them. Each episode, we're going to feature interviews with game changers, business leaders, telling us their origin stories, what made them tick, what got them to where they are now. Why? So it can help you step into your greatness within your life, your business, and your career. Occasionally, you might hear a few solo episodes from myself, moi, as I say, as I leverage my 20 years of entrepreneurship as a CEO and founder to help you grow and level up in your journey to scale your life and your business. So come be a fly on the wall, enjoy the conversation, and I'm stoked to have you here with me. Guys, welcome to today's episode of The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mershazadeh, and boy, do we have a special guest. Leonard Brody is in the house. What's up, Leonard?
Hey, great to meet you. Great to be here.
Oh, man, so pumped to have you today, man. So as the audience knows, the team is always out in the world, scouring the surfaces, looking for badasses, doing amazing things in the world, especially in the world of business, because we know we have a lot of you business folks out there listening to the show. And Leonard ended up on our radar. Now, what I didn't tell Leonard, and what he doesn't know is, I don't know, we get about 150 inbounds a day of people that want to be on the show. And then we're out there pounding the pavement for another couple hundred people. So yeah, it's kind of a pain in the ass to get on the show now. And he was so gracious to accept our invitation to be on the show. And just really, really excited to have you here to share all the amazing learnings that you've had in your career, on your journey. And yeah, man, just want to start off by huge welcome to the show, my friend. Glad to have you here with our crew here at TGM. Thank you.
Thank you. Hopefully I can provide some insight, and that's remotely valuable. But we'll thank me after.
All right. Yeah. I was premature. I always start with a standing applause, and then I end on the second one. So
it could be shitty. You never know.
Bravo. So, you guys, for those of you who are maybe not familiar with Leonard and his work, he's a 2-time Emmy nominee, author of the books Everything I Needed to Know About Business and Innovation Nation. And right now he is the co-founder and chair doing a joint venture of Caravan. And Caravan, they're doing a joint venture with CAA. And for those of you that don't know, that's the world-renowned, what's the word I'm looking for? We're all those agents. Yes, creative agents. So it's Creative Artist Agency. Is that correct? Did I get that right?
Yeah, sports and entertainment agency.
Yeah, they rep like major stars. So Caravan is a private equity and venture studio doing work with folks like Carrie Underwood, Tom Hanks. I'm sure the list goes on and on. But CAA is a big deal in the world of arts and entertainment as far as repping some of the biggest names you all know. And my man here, Leonard, is out there doing some amazing things, has had a ton of experience in business. But man, we are so pumped to have you here to learn from the greats. That's what we do here at The Greatness Machine. Would love to, take a step back, because here at The Greatness Machine, we love origin stories. And Leonard, we'd love for you to give us a little bit of your background. How did you get to where you got to?
Sure. Yeah. My path was a little bit unusual, because I think I'm probably older than you. I'm 78. I look great, but see, now I
was like, whoa! I was like, that is amazing. I was like, you do look amazing for 78. Huh?
I look a lot better for 78 than actually how old I am, but I'm a little bit older than you. And so when I was younger, like, entrepreneurship wasn't really a thing. Like, people weren't really doing it. It was kind of the beginning of the internet. And really, entrepreneurship was kind of like, it really meant you were unemployable. And generally speaking, you were interested in franchising. That was kind of where it was at. And I was lucky enough that as I sort of came into university age and stuff, that it was just beginning. Like, I was I kind of knew in my bones early on that I just didn't want to work for anyone else, and that I probably wasn't a good fit at it. I was always fascinated with entrepreneurship, and I was lucky enough that I had a mentor, a family member, who was really one of the best entrepreneurs in, I would argue, in Canadian history. But I was fortunate enough to have the relationship with him where I could learn from somebody that was a true entrepreneur. And I just took that. I ended up doing pretty traditional education path. I did my undergraduate, got a degree in geopolitics, and then got a law degree and became a lawyer for like 12 minutes and was a shitty lawyer and decided that I didn't want to do that. And I basically, my entrepreneurial journey started when the internet was very nascent. So I started nerding out on bulletin boards and telnets and, just playing around with kind of like the early days of Prodigy and AOL and CompuServe. And I was just fascinated with the flow of information. And, when I think every entrepreneur has this example where they've hit something, they're like, oh, this is going to be really big. Like, this is a significant shift. And it was just clear to me. And so I started my career as an entrepreneur on the internet. I almost never founded anything on my own. It was always a co-founder. I always had someone with me, or I was joining someone else. I was lucky enough to be part of a crew that started a company called Onvia, which was a really big e-commerce play back in Internet Gen 1, and had a nice outcome, went public on NASDAQ, and had a nice taste for kind of, here's how you build momentum and something that's got scale and with the right people. And then prior to what I do now, including that, I've done about 4 companies, co-founded them, and exited 3 of them pretty successfully. One was a bit of a turd, not great, but the rest of them were, successfully exited. And today at CA, we sold our last company to the Anschutz Group in Los Angeles, which is a really large live sport and entertainment business, and got to know the folks at CA after that. And I think this place is really serious about building companies and understanding the brand building journey and that process and startups, and couldn't say no. Came here and have had the opportunity of a lifetime. But my path was weird because in my generation, there weren't that many people who were like, I want to be an entrepreneur. Like, you just didn't, B school didn't cater to that. Law school certainly didn't cater to that. And so I was kind of a pariah until I was like in my 30s, when it was sort of more acceptable.
Yeah, I gotcha. It's so funny. So I'm as you say, I took a quick look at your LinkedIn. So we're not that far apart. I'm 46, but I grew up kind of the same thing. Like, where I started my entrepreneur journey in the 90s, right? And when I was in college, and even maybe a little bit before then. And it was funny, like 10 years later in the early 2000s, I was living in San Francisco, early 20s, and I'd been CEO of my company for a couple of years at that point, and I was the only person I knew in their 20s who was a CEO, and I lived in San Francisco. Which
Right.
like, saying that out loud right now, listeners are like, dude, that's where all young entrepreneurs go. And I'm like, dude, '06, I'm the only CEO I know out of all my friends. And that was because it wasn't like it was a few years later, where you had a Y Combinators and you had all these accelerators. It was unusual to get out of college and go become an entrepreneur, mostly because, at least my opinion, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, it is expensive to start a business. Like, right now, you could start a business for like $15, like legitimately, like probably $1,000, and you start a company, like with a website, and you're up and ready to run. And that's all, and you could do it for less than that. Like, dude, when I started my first company, I think it cost me $20,000 because I had to put in like I had to wire the office. You had to have an office. There was no working from home. You had to have like computers and people and stuff. There wasn't all the stuff you have today. So I hear what you're saying, that it was not the norm. And much like yourself, mine was like, my last job was, I worked for the White House, and I was like, God, I don't want to work for anybody. This is like painful. I have to like file shit and like have somebody tell me what to do, have someone telling me to do some crappy work I don't even want to do anyway. I'm like, oh, I'd rather go get paid a commission only and figure it out for myself. So that was my journey. But so when you got out, you said like you were had a connection around a famous entrepreneur. Like, tell us a little more about that. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think without that relationship, this is my uncle. His name, he's a very well-known Canadian entrepreneur. His name is Israel Asper. And our family, my grandmother's family, like many Jews that came over from Russia or Central or Eastern Europe at the time, were getting chased out of where they were. They were reacting to pogroms and violence, and they left and wanted to come to Canada. And in Russia, they were a traveling orchestra. Like, literally, they were the late 19th century equivalent or 18th century equivalent of the Partridge Family. They had like a touring orchestra, and they would go around and play music. And, my grandmother was first violin, and my cousin's grandfather was the conductor. And I think when they came over, this is not really a new immigrant story, but most new immigrants are forced into entrepreneurship because they just can't fit into the existing infrastructure. And I don't think our family was any different. And so my uncle's father ended up going off and buying movie theaters and sort of getting into the movie theater business. And my uncle was just a character. He was, I believe this is not popular to say this, but I believe this to be true. I think you can teach people entrepreneurship, but there is something inherent in your blood about it that can't be taught. That is just kind of a hunter mentality, and people like certain music, people have certain biases. Like, I think there's just a switch, and he had that switch, and he went off. He became a lawyer, kind of encouraged all of us to become lawyers, and he was a really successful tax attorney, and then decided to run for government. Runs for government, becomes the leader of the opposition in the Manitoba Parliament, and very quickly realizes, wait a second, like, politicians don't really have power. It's the media that has power. And the amazing kind of person that he was, he just said, I'm going to be in the media business. No experience. Went and bought a television station. I think it was in North Dakota. Literally put it on a flatbed truck, moved it to Winnipeg, Manitoba, and built what became the largest television network in Canada, and inevitably one of the largest television broadcasters in Australia, New Zealand, Ireland. Ended up owning all the daily newspapers in Canada, with the exception of a few. And he was just a force of nature. And it was a good early lesson about what was required in entrepreneurship. It wasn't really just the vision, and it wasn't just wanting to do your own thing or financially motivated. There was like a guttural force that you just had as a person, and people would follow, and you would say things and people would listen, and there was a believability and a passion, and he just had that. And so he was a literal rags to riches story. He was an incredible mentor to me. So we used to write. He was busy, and we lived in different cities. He was in Winnipeg, and I grew up in Calgary, Alberta. And we used to write letters back and forth, and he would dictate the letters to his assistant. And some of them were really harsh. Like some of these letters after he passed away, I still have this folder of all of the letters we used to write back and forth. And it's just incredible advice. But he didn't pull any punches with me. If I was being like a little a-hole, he would tell me, it's like, you are being ridiculous, and this is not the way to live your life. And this is, he was very specific about stuff. So I was lucky. Not a lot of people have that in their lives. And I was lucky because in that era, there weren't a lot of entrepreneurial mentors. Today, people have that. There's lots of mentors that you can access. But back then, I was just by fluke lucky. And there is zero chance that I would be on the path I am today without, the guidance I had from him. So he was a character, just a rock star of an entrepreneur.
What was like his, like, when you say he was harsh with you, or that he had some really like solid feedback for you, like what was like A, what was the harshest thing he said to you, and B, like what was his best piece of advice he gave you?
So when I was 18, we were always, like, as a family, whether it was broadcast TV or stuff, we were always touching the entertainment business in some way. And I didn't even like the entertainment business. I just didn't get it, which is ironic doing what my career ended up being. But I wanted to go work at a record company. And I had developed kind of like an entrepreneurial approach to working at a record label. I sort of decided, in the US, there were all these programs where they had campus reps, and, they were really important for moving college radio, which moved real metrics at alternative radio. But they didn't have it in Canada. So I went, and I'll tell you this story just briefly because it will help with his advice. But I literally, this is how old this was, but I took the Yellow Pages, if anyone even remembers the Yellow Pages, but I took the Yellow Pages and I just looked up record companies, and I cold call individuals. Everyone said, no, forget about it. And then it happened that I called MCA Records in Toronto, the Canadian subsidiary of MCA in the States, and it was after hours, and I didn't even realize it. And this guy picked up the phone. This guy, Kevin Shea, who was the head of promotions and publicity at the time and still a great friend, and he just happened to pick up the phone because it was after hours. And I gave him the spiel, and he said, oh, that's really interesting, and why don't you put it in writing? I said, I'll be there in 3 hours. And so I hopped on a bus from Kingston, Ontario to Toronto, Ontario, met with them, and began that. And they weren't really paying me to do it. And Izzy wrote me this nasty letter saying, like, I was in forestry, I planted trees, like, you don't do anything. It doesn't matter how Like how good or how much you want to do it, you get paid to do it, you moron, basically. And he sort of said, like, life doesn't work that way. You don't get to do the fun stuff you want to do without paying your dues. And the core of it was I needed to pay my dues. And he was right. And I stopped doing it and I went off and started building companies and doing other stuff. But he was pretty harsh about that stuff. And from an advice perspective, I, he was a very big, at least with me, he was very big on reputation. And he would really beat into your head like your reputation is honestly the only thing you've got. And you got to manage it very, very carefully. And you need to manage it in the way you manage your time. Like you've got to only let people see the parts of you that are going to build that reputation. And it doesn't mean that your reputation is all that you are, but the parts that you want people to see, you have to be very calculated about. And I always thought that was really interesting. Like, I probably was too young at the time to really understand the difference between like the persona you are in work and the totality of who you are as a person. I get that a lot more now. And I'm probably less calculated than I should be about the sides I show people because it's a skill. It's tough to do that. But I honestly, that is the part that stuck with me for almost my entire life. One, the age old, like your reputation is all that matters. But the byline to that was more important, which was only show people the parts of you that you want as part of that public persona and their reputation, and the rest of it manage yourself and do separately, which has fared fairly well for me over my life, actually. I'm not always good at it. Like, not everyone is good at that stuff, and I wouldn't say I'm a pro at it, but great advice, I thought.
Yeah, it's interesting. I heard Patrick Bet David. I don't know if you follow him at all on social media, but he's a well-known guy, big podcaster. I'm like a person that like some of the stuff he says, I'm like, oh yeah, I can see that. And some of it, especially around entrepreneurism, I think he's a pretty sharp guy. Some of his other stuff, I'm like, not so much. But yeah, he made a point around like you're managing your reputation is the value of it. It's funny. I hadn't heard, you're the second person I've heard say it recently. And obviously there's a belief around, yeah, of course you need to manage your reputation. But I think there's a difference between, again, being your authentic self, right? Which I think is there's a big promotion out there in the world, especially with millennials and Gen Z. It's like, no, you be who you are, like show your true self. And then there's a part of that where it's like, I have a mentor that said to me the other day, he said, the truth and disclosure are not the same thing, right? And so, like you can not disclose and still be honest. You don't have to disclose everything. And so I do think that there's an element of reputational risk when we're just full disclosure. It's like, hey, this is who I am, take it or leave it. And I'm not saying that that's not right for some people. For some people, like they get away with it. Like, there's people where you're like, dude, how does that person get away with that? And like, they get away with it somehow. Their reputation precedes them in a way, and they have enough leverage in the world where they can just do what the hell they want. I think that, to your point, it's a skill, and I think that it's probably even a gift for people that can do it at that level. And I'm like you, what you said, I was like, yeah, that's me, man. Like, I'm not very good at it. I'm better than I used to be, but it's one of those things where it's good advice, sage advice. I do think it's easier heard than done. So when for yourself, like at least that's been my experience. Like I'm always putting my foot in my mouth, and I'm like, oh shit, shouldn't have said that. But at the same time, how are you threading that needle around actually being authentic, but at the same time, like managing the risk of reputation? What's your thoughts around that?
So I'm a very introverted person, and I'm not, and so I do a lot of I do a lot of speaking, and I'm very comfortable like speaking in large groups of people and doing sales and all that kind of stuff. So people just assume you're extroverted, and I'm really not. I'm actually I've learned this a little bit as I got older, but part of that personality and managing that is I find being extroverted just exhausting. So like I think there are people who are great entrepreneurs who are just in that mode all the time. So what they're showing the world is they're kind of authentic. I'm a people person. I want to be out selling. I want to be in meeting to function to meeting to function. And sales teams, and like and they go home and they go to bed and they're just charged up to do it the next day. And that's kind of like I think those people, you're seeing in the business context the truest sense of them. Now, many of them, unfortunately, will turn to substance abuse or they get depressed, or there's all kinds of things that you don't know, that you don't see in the script of someone's life. For me, I'm perfectly okay doing a meeting or speaking to a group, but I need to leave and I need to recharge. And so that's a part of myself that I learned a little bit later in life is if I just was at a huge conference with a bunch of people and my brain was on overload, the worst thing in the world for me is to go for dinner with those people. And like, I just need to go to a room that's quiet and kind of recharge. Like, I'm happy to like put my energy into what I need to, but those recharge moments are really important for me. And so I'm much more of an introvert in that way. And that part of me, I don't think is particularly well known. Like, I kind of do it quietly and privately. And so I think it's easy to have big personalities in the world. I think it's much harder to sort of let people know, like, look, this isn't all of me. Like, I'm quiet. I like to like, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, but like, I have never, you go back to why I became an entrepreneur. It's these things are linked. My brain is just wired wrong. Like, I don't see the world in the way that other people see the world. Like, I don't understand vacations. I don't understand working for other people. Like, when people come to me and they say, I'm super motivated and I've got to do the F-22 report, and I'm like, why do you do that? Like, why do you care? Like, why are you even invested? Like, yet I hire and work with those people all the time, but I don't get it. Like, I don't understand how people show up for work every day for something they don't own. So but it's the same with like vacations. When people say to me, I'm going on vacation, I'm like, to do what? Like, what are you going to do there? Like, you're going to sit on a beach, you're going to read a book. Like, I'll last 12 minutes and I'm, you know, bored out of my mind. So like, I'm not my brain is just wired differently. And I think that part of myself, people know, but I think going back to that advice, I think there's nobody in the world has the right to know all of you. And you don't have an obligation to show that to people. Like, there are parts of you that are very personal and parts of you that are, um, entitled for very limited people in your life to know of. And I think sometimes those things get mixed, where people think I'm a public figure or I'm a CEO or I'm an entrepreneur and everybody's going to know everything about me. It's like, yeah, I don't think so. So that for me has been very important. And I think as you get older, you get more comfortable with who you actually are and the good and the bad. Like, I think it was hard for me when I was younger to be like, yeah, I'm shitty at this. I want to be an unbelievable operator, but I'm just not. Like, and I'll give you one other example. There's a friend of mine in LA who is a bit of a mentor in some respects. He's this he can just cut through noise and get to bullshit really quickly and understand exactly what he's trying to say to you. And he said to me, he's like, you know what your problem is? And I'm like, ready for, of course, the next answer about what my problem is. And he said, you you think sales are beneath you. But in fact, you're a sales guy and you're a really good sales guy, but you hate that about yourself. And he was right. Like, I would never refer to what I did as sales, or, I would couch it as thought leadership or whatever. But the truth is, it's sales. And at the end of the day, I was sort of dodging that and I wasn't comfortable with it, but he kind of called bullshit on it and he was right. And so I think it's that balance between showing people what you are and keeping to yourself what you want that's for your family or your friends. And it's also just accepting the realities of what your skill set is. And I think that just comes with experience.
Yeah, I love that, man. So I want to back up. So obviously you've done a lot in business. Tell us a little bit, like I'd like to hear a little bit of the path after, you figured out you're going to be an entrepreneur and you came up in this paradigm shifting time of the internet becoming something, especially in the 90s. You're talking about bulletin boards and the AOLs and these early days of internet. And I grew up where I used bulletin boards and I was on AOL when they were giving away CDs in like the Sunday paper, which is, anyone that knows what I'm talking about, it's like you probably got hundreds of those. So this is the early days of the internet where you were doing dial up and obviously we're a whole lifetime away from that now. We're probably into the next massive paradigm shift, which is AI. I would say that that's probably on par, if not going to exceed the paradigm shift of the economy and the world from what the internet did. But yeah, tell us how. I'd love to hear some of your entrepreneurial story coming up, from those early days to where you're at right now with Caravan and the work you've been doing.
Yeah, I mean, I just, there was no moment where I was like, I was going to be an entrepreneur. I just didn't have a choice. I knew I wasn't employable. Like I had worked, and maybe this is an important piece of the story and some people may resonate. So I was raised by a single mother, and relative to my community and my friends and, our family is Jewish, and relative to the people I grew up with, we were quite poor. And including my family, we were relatively poor. So I started working when I was really young. Like I began working illegally in Alberta. I think the legal working age is 13 at that time when I was growing up. And I started working when I was like 9 or 10. So illegally, basically. And that was my job era. My job era was I'm 11 years old, 12 years old. This is all I really can do because the entrepreneurial journey wasn't even a thing at that point. Now I could have set up an Amazon FBA business in, my living room and made 200 grand a year doing it as a 12-year-old or 13-year-old. I just did it because I had no choice. Like I had already worked like 5 to 7 years and realized this just sucked. Like I didn't want to do it. I wasn't emotionally invested in what I was doing. I didn't understand why other people were. And frankly, I wasn't a great employee. Because I kind of did my own thing and I was a bit of not a rule breaker, but I wasn't kind of interested in stuff. I just did things my own way. And you realize very quickly that, you can't really do that when you're employed. And I just started. And I started on that journey. And one of my regrets, actually, my uncle passed away when I was quite young. And I often talk to my cousins about it and sort of say, like, I wish he was around so I could ask these questions of him. But one of my regrets is I didn't do a lot of planning around what it meant to be an entrepreneur or life planning. And so I get asked a lot by like young entrepreneurs, like, what's the piece of advice? And what would you tell me? And like, I have no good advice that anyone else can't give you. But the one thing that really I regret, and I try to talk to younger entrepreneurs about all the time, is if you're going to go on this journey, forget about what the company is, forget about what your industry is, forget about the financial opportunity, put that all aside. Before you do any of that, you have to ask the core question, which is, how does whatever company I'm going to build map to my personal life and map to the life objectives I have? Meaning, do you want children? Do you want to be on the road all the time? Do you want to manage people? How much money do you really need to make to be happy? Because you hear a lot of younger entrepreneurs like, "Oh, build $1 billion company," and I want to, but they don't realize that the money that they gain doesn't correlate to happiness. And they don't necessarily think about like, what's my minimum use case? How much money do I really need to be happy? And design your business around your life goals. Nobody does that. It's very rare. They do it later. And by the way, this is not like, I wouldn't say this is a data-driven analysis, but if you look at it closely enough, this is why immigrant businesses are typically have a higher success rate than the general population. Because when you're an immigrant coming to a country, you know exactly why you're doing what you're doing. And it's heavily tied to financial and life outcomes. You're generally doing it because you want to educate your kids and you want to put a roof over their head. And when things get ugly and you're dealing with your one of several dumpster fires of the week, those are very grounding. You know exactly why you're doing it. Versus a kid who gets out of university and starts a software company and reads Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup. It's like, this didn't work. I'm moving on to something else. Like that, I think one has created a generation of entrepreneurs that are flaky and don't have the fortitude or the ability to withstand dumpster fires, which is a character thing. And I think they're not connected to what they want out of life, which is why I think you have such a low success rate with entrepreneurial ventures in the general population, because it's just not connected to the outcomes of their lives. Why divorce rates amongst entrepreneurs are higher, mental illness amongst entrepreneurs is higher. I think that's the core reason. And if I was smart, I would have done that long ago, thought about that.
And so at what point did it dawn on you? Because for me, I would say it didn't dawn on me till, I don't even know, man. Pretty far into the journey. Probably up 50, like I'm 46, 41 was when I finally was like, I'm not doing this. And I sold my business and kind of like went and meandered for a while before I was like, hey, I need to do this differently. But at what point, what was it for you where you're like, yeah, I'm going to design my life around, like, the business isn't going to, because it was always for me, it was the business kind of drove me. It wasn't necessarily me driving the business. And even though there was a like facade or not a facade, like a delusion of control, like the reality was I was just getting up to grind every day to like make the business successful. And like, that's what it takes if you really want to have a big success. I mean, I believe that. And there will be people that listen to this and go like, well, what about this example? I'm like, yeah, motherfuckers, like there's people that win the lottery all the time. It doesn't mean like you're going to win the lottery. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I looked at it a little bit differently, which was, it wasn't, I think you're right. You can't build a company without grinding and hustle. It just doesn't work. You can build a lifestyle business that way. Like, sure. I think you can own a laundromat, or you can do things that are great lifestyle businesses. But the first time I took venture, really, where I was the lead fundraiser. So in some of the other companies, I was a co-founder or early employee, but I wasn't really raising the capital. The first time I did it as a solo entrepreneur or a co-founder, really leading the charge, that is when it kicked into me very clearly that, like, I do have a boss, and that boss is my LPs. And I have to think about that. And then I started just doing the math where I was like, well, wait a second. Is it better for me to own 10% of a company worth 100 million and liquidate, or is it better to own 100% of a company worth 10 million? Because I get to the same result. Like, the math to me is the same. And that's when I started asking the questions about, like, well, how much money do you really need? And I had the benefit of my uncle watching, and there's a very clear line of diminishing return of money. Like, I think you reach a point where money really provides freedom, and every dollar after that diminishes your freedom. And you have to figure out what that number is for you, because it may be you want to take care of your parents, or it may be you want to be a huge donor to a university, or whatever the number is. The minute you hit that number, you have to be very calculated about it, because every dollar after that is a diminishing return.
Yep.
And I think people just don't get it. And I think part of it is age, and part of it is just being self-aware enough in the beginning to know, like, okay, this kind of sucks. Like, I've now taken $40 million from venture, which means I got to return 400 to 500, which means I'm a slave to that number now for the next decade. And that isn't really why I started this. It's not really the vision for it. So it was really when I took venture that I was like, no, this is kind of something I should have thought through earlier. And that's the math. I think most entrepreneurs don't do the math. I think a lot of people get into this cycle where they're like, I need capital to raise the business, and I'm going to take 10 million. And they don't realize that they might have been better off just slugging it out on their own, because the end outcome would be the same. Mm-hmm. That 100 million example, if I can own 100% of it and it's a 10 million business, I'm going to deal with less idiots. I can control the people around me. I don't have this boss hanging over me, this LP. And I think if you were honest and you sat through a group of YPO or any of these people that were entrepreneurs, very few of them did that math in the early days. They just got sucked into the treadmill. And ironically, it's the same treadmill that employees get sucked into. It's just a different path. And I think, like, the only thing that matters for entrepreneurs now is map your personal life objectives, financial, family, travel, all of that to the company. Because if you don't do it, you're just going to be part of that 80% number. And just
Yeah.
look at immigrant business as an example.
Yeah, it's a great lesson, and I do think that I think you also don't know what you don't know, right? Like if I asked 25-year-old me like what my goals were and align them to what they are now, I'd be like, that's it, man. Because my goals were so
Yeah.
insane, right? They were so insane, and then you have some lived experience, and you're like, well, what am I even gonna like? Like I'm just gonna speak for myself. It's like my goals are to be a billionaire, and now they're not. Like I don't like if it
But
happens,
why?
great. Yeah.
But
Then
but
oh
the
man,
question is why? Why a billionaire? What will you? And this is the drill down because I think you're
right?
right. A lot of people will say, "I want to be a billionaire." What for?
Yeah.
Like, what are you going to do with that? What's the outcome? Why do you need it? And I hear you. Like, I think my 25-year-old self, I was a moron. I was in law school and I was building a player agency. I did all kinds of crazy stuff. But I do think the difference today. I think 25-year-olds today are 1,000 times smarter than we were when we were 25. They have way more access to
Way
information, way
more.
more self-aware. Like, it's just, I think you're right. When we were 25, those questions would have been much more difficult than they are today. But today they're not. And today you have an infrastructure around entrepreneurship, micro entrepreneurship, that really makes it easy to say, like, you know what? I'm going to run an Amazon FBA business at my house. I'm going to drop ship. I'm going to make 150 grand a year. I'm going to play the flute, or I'm going to volunteer my time at a, you know, children's hospital, or whatever you want to do. You can do that. We couldn't do that when we were 25. Like, there
No.
was a path and you went on the path. Now I can think of 10 opportunities where a 16-year-old can make 150 grand a year without any investment at all.
Yeah. That's crazy. It's so funny. Like I'm going to give a great example of this information is this podcast. like, dude, like you're going to hear two dudes that have been like arguably done very well in business, like just shooting the shit about shit that we wish we knew. Like there
Yeah,
was no access. Your access was you were lucky enough to have a really successful uncle who my guess is grew up at a time when it was hard as hell to make money, and he was giving you slapping you around with life lessons that if he told a 25-year-old that now, it's not even necessarily relevant anymore, right, as it
correct.
was then, right?
Correct.
Like there was
Yeah.
way more. Like I look at the advice I got. My dad was born in 1939 in Iran, and he came up coming to the United States, getting his MBA, going back to Iran. We fled the country during the revolution, and then he worked in a fucking gas station for 20 years. So his lessons were way different because like this is a guy that had an MBA, crushing gas, and he did well considering. But like, dude, he had a worldview that's so different, and your uncle had a worldview that's so different than the 25-year-olds have today. They get to hear two guys that got to learn from those people that learned, go out there, test, do when it wasn't available. So yeah, this podcast is a perfect example of democracy of information so that these 25-year-olds can do better. So I love that,
And
man.
could also make money at it. Like, if you were like, look, I'm interested in sharing stories and I need to make 100 grand a year to be happy, whatever the number is that you need, you can pretty much see 15 or different paths. Podcasting could be one of them. Like, there's lots of ways you can do it. And it just wasn't around then. And I also think, like, if you look at the immigrant narrative, so many of us came from immigrant families, whether first gen or second gen. And I think that one of the challenges, there's a corollary, in the physics side of, you've got a generation that's way more informed, has much deeper smarts than we did at that age. I think the corollary to that is they are the furthest. If you look at millennials and Gen Z, they are the furthest generations away from experiencing true international trauma. Like, they are distanced from World War II. They are distanced from the Depression.
Yep.
They're multiple generations away from true economic hardship. And I say this a lot, like, if you really want to read about life lessons, like true, deep life lessons, and I left this out at the beginning, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it. one of the great teachers to me wasn't just my uncle. One of the great teachers to me was the Holocaust. My family were deeply, deeply impacted by the Holocaust, and on all four sides of my family, my two grandparents on each side, and we lost hundreds and hundreds of people. But the ones who survived, the reason you see so much content about the Holocaust and movies and stories is because the level of the richness of the human story that comes out of that is it's just, and hopefully we never experience anything like that again, but the level of the human story that comes out of that is just unprecedented. And we, my grandfather's family, his sister adopted a Holocaust survivor whose family was just obliterated in Birkenau. And he was not related to us. He was an orphan that was adopted by the family, and he became like a grandfather to me. And every minute I spent with that guy, who he's still alive, by the way, I think he's 94 now, he and others like him were just constant reminders of the spirit and the fortitude that you can just take with you every day. I mean, this is a guy who saw things that were unspeakable. I mean, the human brain could not comprehend it. And yet he got up every day and he went to work and he'd sleep on his factory floor in his office. But he was also one of the most generous people. And so I think when I look back on that, this generation is missing that. They're too distanced from true global scale trauma. And so you've got this highly educated, super smart, but missing a bit of grit. And you just get that. Like, that from your dad, from being in a gas station. Like, there's grit when you come halfway across the world and don't speak the language and have $10 in your pocket and, you were a doctor or whatever you were in the country you came from. That's grit.
Yeah.
That grit is missing in many respects in generations below us. Not their fault. It's just, thank God we haven't experienced anything like that again. And so that's the challenge.
Yeah.
I think you're smart, but not gritty.
Yeah, it's. I was watching a thing on social yesterday, and it was like a woman talking about 18-year-old woman. She's talking about how, yeah, like that basically America's corrupt, to the core, and that we should just give the land back to the Native Americans, and it was like it was insanity when I'm hearing this person talk, and I'm like, this is a person that literally was born in 2006. That to say those things, and there's probably some truth to the atrocities of the Native Americans. There's no question that happened, but it's like, dude, like the whole world. If using that logic, then we got to go back and give the land back to everyone that's ever taken land, which is basically 10,000, 20,000 years of land giving back to like who? To like there's no real logic there, right? And my takeaway from this was I was like, look, I'm not discounting that we've done bad things. Many societies have done bad things to each other. But my instant thought was, this is a person that does not appreciate what they have, like the freedom of the United States of America, which is like we're a flawed country in many ways, but there's a lot of freedom here that you don't have in other places. Like, I have not been back to Iran since I was 1.5 years old. I'm 46 years old because I'm afraid. Like, I have a citizenship. I'm legally a citizen there. I'm like, I don't know. They might make me go join the military there. I don't trust that government. This is something I take for granted here, right? And I grew up, like I said, with a father who was born and raised in Iran in 1939, and a grandfather that was born and raised in rural Italy that fought for the guerrillas against Mussolini. Like, I'm like directly affected by those gritty men. And then my mom and my grandmother and and I didn't even meet my grandparents who were my dad's side because they passed away before I was born. And I'm like, and I could see that affect the way I work. And when you're talking about the Holocaust, I'm like, I have lots of friends whose grandparents were Holocaust survivors, or they were brothers and sisters of people who are Holocaust survivors, and had lots of family. And we have, to your point, this gap of generational experience. So now it's just like criticism of what is without actual like experience of what is. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I look, I think it's hard not to sound like a grumpy old guy when you say this stuff. but the reality, I think, is put aside the argument. I think there's a couple truths that are just clear when you look at the situation we're in now. One is, I think you have a generation of people that are sort of in their early 20s to mid 20s that feel disenfranchised. And most of that is economic disenfranchisement. I think they go to university, they don't see the transfer of wealth that we may see from our parents. They don't see the same outcomes. They're $100,000 in debt, not clear what for. And I think there is a disconnect, whether it's existential or real, between a generation and where our generation was. And I think that's why the risk is that they are more easily radicalized.
Yeah.
And if you combine that, and by the way, I get it, because the 1% is growing, and the cost of buying a house or leading a normal life is very complex in the Western world now. So I think if I was 20 today, I'd probably have similar feelings. So I get it. But I think you combine that where the corollary of the positives of an incredibly smart generation is, you combine that with this radicalization or this marginalization of feeling close to an economic outcome that you'd see in your life. That creates a really bad recipe with social media, because once you combine that with a really democratized voice where anyone can say anything and it's not fact checked, you start to live in a post-truth era where terms don't have meanings anymore. So going back to your example, like, you'll see a lot of people on American campuses that are US students burning flags and using terms that they don't really understand the meaning of. And then it just perpetuates. And so everyone starts using the term. And you can see very quickly how these things get out of hand. And so I think that is a real problem going forward, that the disappearance of the middle class, which is maybe the better way to look at it, is exceptionally dangerous. And that's where you get radicalization. That's where you also get, I think, the entrepreneurial gap plays a role in that, because the more that 1% that rises is driven a lot by entrepreneurship. And the people who aren't in that are left behind. And when you're left behind, bad shit happens.
Yeah.
And so all of these experiments with universal basic income and all the stuff that people are trying to think about, well, how do you bridge that gap? That is going to be one of the biggest challenges from a societal perspective in North America in the next, certainly in our lifetime, is how you bridge that gap, bring the people that are marginalized back to the middle, whether it's opinion, economics, any of it. Like, when you and I were younger, had we looked at the political spectrum today, or we've talked about entrepreneurial spectrum, we get that, but I don't think you ever would have believed it. I don't think you would have believed that someone would have, on January 6th, would storm the Capitol. Like, that would have been completely imaginable. So I think there is, and just to bring this back to what we were talking about, I think there is a responsibility on the entrepreneurial community to recognize that they can contribute to that problem. That marginalization is partially at the hands and the behest of the success of entrepreneurs. And there's got to be a real push to bring everyone back to the middle. Because without everyone in the middle, nothing good comes from that.
Yeah. Leonard, gosh, man, we're just getting started. We got 3 minutes left on the show. Look, I want to respect your time. First of all, like, this has been a really insightful conversation, and didn't expect to have it, but in the way it went down, like I never do, but it's so cool to learn from what you've learned from. Where can people who want to learn more about the work you're doing? I know we didn't get to talk too much about Caravan, but where can they connect with you or learn more about what you're doing? And I'd love to get to our greatness question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a terrible. You can find me on Instagram at lbrody at lbrody. Caravan is hellocaravan.com. You can see all about our companies and what we're doing. I'm a pretty quiet person, so I don't really blog or I don't really do much. So I'm a terrible personal brand guy. But you can see what we're doing, and you can even Google Caravan. You'll see some of the work we've done in the companies and the work we've done at with Carrie Underwood at Fit 52 and the companies we built like High and Yummers with the cast of Queer Eye. So we've got a lot of really cool stuff going. That's probably the best place to find me. And frankly, like my email's pretty accessible and I answer it all the time and happy to chat with people if there's anything I can be helpful on.
Awesome. All right, we'll go ahead and put some of that stuff in the show notes. But so, you ready for the greatness question, my friend?
I'm ready.
All right, let's do it. So, Leonard, what is the number one barrier to creating greatness that you've overcome in your life, and how have you overcome it?
Honestly, it was self-doubt. I think I grew up in a single mother home. And I think for me personally, the thing that consistently got in my way was my inability to truly believe I could do something. And I think everybody has those demons and those ghosts where they think like, I mean, it sounds trite and cliche, but I wrestled a lot when I was younger with like, do I deserve this? Can I really do this? Or am I just being a fraud? Like, do I really know what I'm doing? Am I really a good entrepreneur? Do I really understand journalism? Do I really understand how to build companies with celebrities? And like, and I think inevitably that was the biggest obstacle to doing anything great because you were just constantly in your own way. And as you know, having built companies, there is no great day. Like when somebody says to me, do you have a good day? I'm like, I don't ever have a good day. There's no such thing as good days because every day I've got amazing things that happen and a series of dumpster fires. And my day's either net positive, net neutral, or net negative. And when you're in that mode, when you're constantly as an entrepreneur dealing with dumpster fires, you have about 60 moments every day where you're like, should I be doing this? Like, is this worth doing? Am I the right person to do this? And if that self-doubt creeps into your head, it's like if you're an elite athlete, the minute, not that I'm an elite athlete, but like it's a similar analogy that like if that doubt, if you don't control that, it's game over. It doesn't matter what you're doing. And I think I didn't manage that. I struggle to manage it my entire life. I still do, but I didn't get to manage it until much later. And I think if I look back on my life, my biggest regret was that I didn't manage that earlier. And I think I would have achieved a lot more of what I wanted to achieve had I been able to manage that process and manage that thought. And it doesn't go away. It doesn't ever go away. You just become better at it.
Love that, man. And such sage advice for our listeners. Leonard, such a pleasure. So much gratitude here from here at the Greatness Machine for you coming on the show. Thank you so much, my friend. Appreciate you.
No, thank you.
You guys, share this. We at the Greatness Machine love to share great information, and Leonard was a wealth of information and taught me so much today. So much gratitude from us here at the show. Until next time, peace out, everybody. We love you. You are listening to The Greatness Machine, and that's a wrap for today. Listen, if you love what you heard, subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform that you're tuning in on so that you don't miss any of our future episodes. We have tons of great people coming on, and we're stoked to have you here to enjoy it with us. Leave us a review. Tell us what you love most about this particular episode. We love getting the reviews. We love to see what you guys love most. And if this particular episode, made you think of someone who's leveling up in their business and in their life, print screen, share it with them. Leaders are the best givers. And after all, we're all here to support and grow with each other. And in case you want to see some of the fun behind the scenes shots or some of the things that we're doing, I'm actually writing about this in my weekly newsletter. Go to www.therealdarius.com and subscribe to my newsletter. We're talking about fun things like business and life and mindfulness and cryptocurrencies and gosh, I don't even know, everything and anything, but it's tons of fun stuff I write about. I try to get it out on a weekly basis. You can subscribe at www.therealdarius.com. And with that said, look, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. I love you. Peace. We're out of here. See you guys on the next one.
She's my lover.